Well, welcome back to News Gang, and we are still on this issue of corruption. Ladies, gentlemen, we saw Rotich and company in court, and it took the president 48 hours or something to replace. There's this standard that has been set now by himself, you know, about people stepping aside, and it still looks like a difficult thing to do in this country, because you would have expected, even before the president said anything, that those very people who are charged in court would do that, or very quickly the president would just tell them to go away for a while. I mean, it still looks like we are not bold enough to deal with this thing of corruption in the manner that we keep saying we will.
Well, the president doesn't need to tell them. I mean, the magistrate already said that Treasury is a scene of crime, and that do we now call him former CS Rotich cannot access his office unless you know, with an IO. Yes. There you go.
Even though we don't quite know what his status is.
Because even with the announcement, it just said that, you know, Ukur Atani is acting, but it remains silent on the case of Rotich. But I guess because the magistrate already dealt with that you can no longer access your office. But surely, should the president? Yes, it really is. But should the president have
deductive reasoning, like, okay, it follows, therefore.
But then I also think CS Rotich did not have to step aside. The magistrate's instructions were clear.
But you see, the magistrates just said they should not step there. But you see,
if he can't step in his office,
where else can he operate?
Or he can work from home.
Yeah, he can be given some checks to sign at home. Like, I mean, honestly, the point is that there should have been a more decisive, a more explicit move by somebody. If it was not the people who had been charged, then the person who hired them really ought to have said, you know what?
Because it
sends a clear, unequivocal message about the attitude that the president and everybody else ought to have about corruption, isn't it?
You see, moments like this, presidents normally take charge, or the presidential spokesperson or a representative. State House should have spoken a lot earlier than 48 hours. And look, the president had about 3 months really to prepare for this moment. We all remember when Rotich was questioned at DCI for 3 days. It was already
almost 3 entire days.
It was already untenable to continue expecting that he can hold on to the position of finance. He was tainted. He was being injured. I mean, 3 days with the DCI means there is something that has gone terribly wrong. When you look at President Kenyatta's approach compared to, say, Mwai Kibaki's approach, because there were moments like this for Mwai Kibaki as well, and you remember he went on national television and said, I've accepted the resignation of the late George Saitoti. David Muraria was there, Kiraitu Murungi too. Because he knew that is where things were going. We also, I mean, we don't even know whether those ministers actually had resigned.
And they couldn't say, like, no, I haven't.
They couldn't say, yes. And they can't go and complain and say, but I did not. I think there's a lot of indecisiveness in the Uhuru State House. They take a lot of time to do things that look straightforward. Look at the sports, the former sports cabinet secretary. It wasn't easy to ease him out. I mean, I hear jokes that it nearly took the vacating or abolishing of the Ministry of Sports just so that you don't communicate that, hey, Minister Chesa, you've been fired. I think the indecision really shows in moments like this. Very slow to make those decisions. I mean, the Ministry of Finance docket is so sensitive. Markets reacted, you remember, on Monday to the arrests. So the government needed to have moved fast. The appointing authority needed to have moved very quickly to reassure markets. And they took 48 hours to come up with an end.
It was not a question of if, but when Rotich would exit or would be prosecuted. Because at one point, I think the waters of Arror and Kimwarer were becoming too much, and it was inevitable that he would be drowned. He would be swept away by the waters, and truly he was. But I also look at the issue of a missed opportunity for the president. For the last few months, we've had issues about divisions in the cabinet, divided loyalty in the cabinet. Maybe this would have been a very good opportunity to shake things up a little bit, and maybe still show who is boss, make a few changes, and basically confirm to the country, this is how I want situations. We've even had calls from some members of parliament, i.e. Minor Commander, the nominated member of parliament, asking the president to even dismiss the entire cabinet and reconstitute it so that he has 100% loyalty. Because, truth be told, when we had issues about allegations of assassination, issues about a divided cabinet, clearly you can see there is a problem. Maybe this was an opportunity presented by fate, or do I say presented by graft, to put,
or by dams,
to put the house in order.
But Yvonne, this does leave the DP with some egg on his face, quite frankly. I mean, we don't know what will happen in the courts, but the fact that this has come to a point where it has gone to court at all, and he was there, you know, saying this is there's no money that's lost. We know what is going on here. We are not a stupid government that, you know, we can just do things like this. But also just looking at the sort of pattern that we have seen even with the politicians, especially the ones that are allied to him, about this case where, you know, they dismissed it as succession politics, and just this whole thing of people jumping in to comment on what is quite frankly a purely legal thing.
When this first broke, and of course there was the reactions, and I'll talk about the DP's reaction in just a moment, but the majority leader in the Senate, Kipchumba Murkomen, who we in fact hosted here on the show tonight, and the gang had a moment to weigh in, and the reactions are always so swift, even before. I mean, the deputy president himself said, well, the amounts in question, by the way, and this was when investigations were still ongoing. They hadn't even gotten to the point we are now of arrests and, you know, charges and prosecution. And you know, he said, but, you know, no money was lost and there was a government guarantee for this. And the same thing happened again now with the arrest earlier this week when, once again, Senator Kipchumba Murkomen outside the DCI headquarters said he had seen the charge sheet and, you know, and I found that interesting because he had just been arrested. Was a charge sheet ready at this point?
I would doubt.
You know, before, because wouldn't that be when he is being arraigned in court? But so the reactions have always been very swift, that it's our own that are being targeted, that this is a succession war, that this is, you know, the forces within Jubilee and the fight against corruption that's being used to settle political scores. But yet, the arrest and charge has been a vindication of sorts of all of the political rhetoric that we've seen. And then interestingly, then the senator, after dismissing this as 2022 succession politics, is then lead counsel in court, I think the following day.
Well, at least you would say he was there as a lawyer, not as a senator.
Well, but you know, it's interesting to me that they would say this on one day, and then the next day we're in court. And so if you feel that this process is really a political one and you completely dismiss it, then, you know, treat it with a contempt.
But Oscar Sudi went further, isn't
he? He
did, but Murkomen tried to speak as two different people. On Monday, he was a politician, senator for Elgeyo Marakwet, saying this is about 2022 politics. The next day, he was very, you know, forthcoming in court and addressing the court as a lawyer. But yes, there was this swift politicization of the issue, and it's not any different from what we saw in the preceding months. This has always been the conversation when you talk about the defense that the deputy president has led on this issue of Kimwarer, Arror. It has taken that part, that shape of a regional project, basically. So every leader is supposed to be behind that. And if you look at the sentiments of the North Rift leaders, they've all been, you know, sort of aligned when it comes to the issue of Kimwarer, Arror. But the facts on the ground tell a different story. And it's going to be very interesting to see what case the prosecution brings to court. Because, look, from the coverage that we've done, it looks very, very untidy. First of all, there's nothing happening on the ground. Second of all, and this has been captured by the charges, CMC Di Ravenna is a company that is under.
And speaking of which, by the way, today there's been that startling revelation by CS Simon Chelogui of Water and Sanitation, essentially saying that, you know, we've sunk in 11 billion, sunk into that dam, pun intended, and yet he essentially said, we are not sure whether this is going to be completed, we may have to stop it altogether.
You see, truth be told, the easiest way to make mega billions currently is in dams, because these are multi-billion shillings projects, and the way they are formatted, the way they are presented, the way they are argued is like, this is the game changer, this is a life changing kind of a project, this is a life and death kind of a situation. When you talk about food security, when you talk about water sustainability, electricity, these things make a lot of sense. And so it becomes very easy to sell this kind of an idea and even to borrow money for such projects. But truth be told, mega projects often equate to mega corruption. And this is a huge network of people, because there are quite a number of issues involved, a number of people involved. So the bigger the project, the bigger the money, the bigger the association in terms of who gets what. And when you look at the statistics, they are indicating that we have in excess of 60 dams that have been formulated and money invested in them.
500 billion.
500 billion shillings. And a lot of this money will simply end up in a few people's pockets. And so maybe this is an opportunity to start asking ourselves as a country, the dams and the investment therein, is it value for money? Probably not.
I'd like to, what was interesting about what the CS Chelogui said is, you know, we don't know which way we're going to proceed, especially with Itare Dam. And he said they've spoken to the company CMC Di Ravenna, and we can't speak about this because it is not in court yet, that, you know, he's been writing to them, asking them, so if you are unable to continue with the project, we need to subcontract it, and he's not hearing back from them. And that seems interesting to me. So are we waiting for them to get back?
It was this helplessness that I found quite startling. Because
but again,
this is the CS, and he's speaking like
I have written to them, and they're
like
not.
There's nothing I can do about it.
So are they going to be held responsible? Should we come to the point where they decide? And it seems to me that that is pretty obvious at this point, considering the fact that the same company is now in this other court process with Arror and Kimwarer. But that helplessness from the CS is quite stunning. But here are some of the issues that we need to think about, not just with the dams, but with a number of the scandals we now have. It's in the manner in which we do our procurement. Do we follow due diligence, even of the companies that are involved? How is it that we start making payments before a project is designed, conceptualized, and even budgeted for? So if we want to buy this table, we have to, or design it, we have to design it.
And I mean, we've had some people say that, well, you know what, that is how they've done it in most of the other dams. And if that be the case,
and if that be the case, then we should investigate all of the other dams, because we are at risk. All of those 60 dams that we're talking about, that I remember even the Cabinet Secretary for Agriculture saying, oh, well, you know, we moved. Remember when he made the grand promise and said, okay, fine, they're not big dams, but they're, you know, smaller water pans. And let's also take a look at the intricacies with some of these. Who essentially owns the project? When we first talked about this issue, you know, how water and sanitation,
East African Regional Corporation.
East African Regional Corporation. So you have one parastatal that's under one ministry, then you have one ministry that is split in two ways, and then it's also our contracting process, public-private partnerships, government-to-government contracts, projects being initiated by a parastatal.
No one is interested in those processes. Nobody is interested in those processes. They do exist on paper, and what has happened is an alteration of those processes, a violation of those processes. We need to put these things in perspective, and you can't do this without looking back at the entire 7 years of the Jubilee administration. It comes in as a coalition in 2013, divided equally, 50-50 between President Uhuru Kenyatta and Deputy President William Ruto. And then what happens a few months later is now the emergence of some of these corruption cases taking the shape of the government. suspects are either coming from the Uhuru Kenyatta side or William Ruto's side. There's been a competition like never seen before in the history of this country to loot in the last 7 years. That is a fact. A lot of people have been produced by a lot of millionaires and billionaires now.
It's not an arms race, it's a graft race.
It's a graft race. There's been none like that since independence, and I think we can go deep into statistics and see if we've ever produced so many rich suppliers, so many rich contractors.
And the number of zeros have increased, actually.
The numbers of zeros have increased.
It was unthinkable at some point in this country.
Billions.
The only thing that was, the only corruption thing that was for a long time associated with the billions was Goldenberg.
Yes.
Everything else was always in the millions.
Yes, so what brings this fight against corruption now, where now everybody seems to be awake to it, is that everybody has found that this is not sustainable. You can actually run out of money to pay the civil service, to pay for things, and increasingly to pay for your debt, which stands at, I think, 5.1 trillion now.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
It's a lot of money. So there is a state of panic that, hey, guys, where is the money? We can't pay the Chinese, we can't pay our own people. Corruption in the last 7 years has been monumental.
And speaking of the money, and particularly in this case and others, beyond just the procedural failure and what you were saying about how people don't care about procedure and how it should be done, perhaps one of the issues, and it all falls on the courts now, and the evidence that will be presented by the DPP in terms of just making sure that you give the judges enough for a conviction, if that is what their final decision will be. But I don't know if you read this in the newspaper. There was the article where an insider aware of the investigation said they traced the deposits and the transactions at the bank with the help of Dubai authorities. The accounts have been frozen. So it looks like they're following the money. What would make the case airtight is not just pointing out procedural failures, that you failed to follow this procedure, but also tracing the money. If they can do the two of those, then they probably have a watertight case.
And just related to that, Yvonne, you know, this is very, very interesting, because we've got 28 entities and persons indicted so far. But it doesn't mean that is the entire list. There could be a few more people out there. You remember the incident earlier today at Treasury. A rogue policeman went there.
From Kamukunji police station.
From corruption on corruption.
Picked some targets and told them that he's investigating the dam scandal. And if you don't do something, I'll arrest you.
But I mean, personally, I was surprised that the focus was just on those cops. Like, why is this
How
guy?
about the
And
people
the one who
Why
bribed,
are you giving
What do they know about
giving 200,000 to some guy if you have nothing
But
to
then
worry
isn't
about?
it interesting that this is a corruption case, and then the cops said there's corruption again involved in this? Like, they're taking advantage of the situation. The sheer audacity of that heist.
How to corruptly get out of corruption dragnet.
But at least Magistrate Ogotia declared the Treasury a sin of crime.
It really is. Now
it
with
is.
everything.
It is.
Yeah, it really
we just
is.
need a yellow tape around it.
But this speaks to the kind of collaboration that goes into this kind of mega corruption, if you may like it. Very many people are involved in it. There's somebody who will sign off a document so that it can move over to another person who signs so that some money can get out, and so on and so forth. So that explains why an officer at the National Treasury would be scared that he's been mentioned as one of those who are being investigated. Probably he remembers, by the way, there's something that I did in relation to the ongoing cases. But fundamentally, since 2013, we've had a series of mega projects. And a lot of this money is borrowed. And of course, it concerns everybody, because incrementally, the debt burden is ballooning, you know, at an alarming rate. Maybe as part of President Uhuru Kenyatta's legacy, it's maybe an opportunity to do what he said not so long ago, that, hey, stop all the new projects, let's audit what has been invested in and has been commissioned as projects, and we see whether there is value for money. Maybe a lot of these projects are on paper but non-existent practically. He ordered such an investigation, such an audit, but no results yet.
And can I ask about that? Because who was to do this audit?
There is the Inspectorate of State Department, I would think.
Yes. So where does this lie? I mean, we know him to say a lot of things, and the follow-through is something else, including the fact that he said all tenders that are awarded by government should be published on our website for the entire country to go and check it out and see. Go to that website today and see how many tenders have actually been posted there. I mean, I think this is an opportunity for the president to speak and to act and to follow through on all of the things he has said. I mean, you know, this is just that moment. So that when scandals like this come up, he would say, this is where the audit is. And to give periodic, you know, reports to the country and to say, well, a couple of months ago or last year, I ordered an audit of all, this is where we are with the audit. This is what we're doing.
Like there's one project,
this was an opportunity to
like
do
there's
that.
probably one project that very many people keep talking about, which I think would be a very important point of reference. You remember those mobile clinics that were imported, the containers? They're still lying at Miritini. How many years later? 3 years,
that scandal,
4 years later?
that scandal goes right to his doorstep.
It does. But you see...
In fact, right into his family.
So the issue then is... there are specific, there are specific cases that you can point clearly and say, here, kuliendaje, here, kuliendaje, specifics, so that maybe he can demonstrate that something is happening.
Should there be a deliberate attempt to make sure that the war on corruption, from a political standpoint, is not only
being done, but being seen to be done.
Fairly across the board, indiscriminately? Because I think what I hear from some of these politicians is that, yeah, it is fine, but it seems to be imbalanced, that it is not going for everybody everywhere.
Joe,
because there are some scandals that have been on ice for a long time, and we haven't heard about them.
Joe, you listened to Oscar Sudi yesterday calling for the resignation of the president, and he was basically saying, look, this is not balanced. This is not balanced, and the issue is down to what I described earlier about the divide in the government and the scandals that lie on either side. When it comes to the TNA side, you remember they staffed the Ministry of Health. The appointees were coming from the Ministry of Health. They're coming from the TNS side, the Uhuru Kenyatta side. But you see, the NYS case was not executed with the drama that we are seeing with the Kimwarer dam. You see, the Ministry of Health Happy House scandal, where 5 billion was confirmed to have gotten lost and denied by Deputy President William Ruto, confirmed as lost by Auditor General. You don't see much happening on that front. Ruaraka land saga. Ruaraka land saga.
That one stands out like a sore thumb.
Where somehow it was painted. It was a very, very interesting decision to say that, you know, the minister was misled. You know, it's as if you went to a kindergarten and said, guys, sign this up. This school belongs to a private individual.
The same could be asked of him, whether he did his due diligence before.
Yes. So these are the questions that will come, not because people are defending Henry Rotich, but because they want balance in how these cases are carried out. The fact is, both wings of the coalition, heavy stench of impropriety reigns.
I remember a soundbite, a very memorable soundbite by Honorable Raila Odinga during the 2017 general election, the campaigns. Wakihesabu, tunahesabu. Wakiweka, tunaweka. Wakirusha, tunarusha. Wakiapisha. So the same concept applies here. You see, these two sides of the Jubilee administration were together 2013 to 2017. So they know each other very well. They know wanajuana kwa vilemba. They know who was dealing with what at what time. So if you ukirusha, the other side will also rusha. Ukiweka, the other side will also weka. So there's a lot of, in street lingo, what we call kusetiana. Yeah. See, you have said, you have snitched me on this. Ata mimi niko na dozia. And a lot of these things you will see them. Wakirusha, tunarusha. Wakiweka, tunaweka. That kusetiana. And maybe we've not seen the last of this kind of situations. Expect maybe for purposes of balance, maybe a TNA-leaning cabinet secretary also being prosecuted.
Well, let's see. I just want to mention before we close, you remember when DPP said at the anti-corruption conference a little earlier this year that governors must step aside with that issue. And I am reminded that, you know, there's Justice Mumbi Ngugi's decision today that is monumental and would be a game changer, where she said that, you know, county governors who've been charged with graft should step aside and have their deputy, you know, take over in a capacity until the case is heard to its conclusion.
Yes,
so, I mean, there's,
subsection 62, subsection 6 of the Anti-Corruption Act as unconstitutional. Because basically it was a clause that basically sets people free.
And that could actually then, you know, be applied to
but it's
all
amazing.
others, not just county governors.
Kudos to her. It's a great thing she's been proposed for the Court of Appeal. I mean, she's one of those judges that push the envelope and try to stretch the boundaries of what we know the law to be now, and for it to capture the spirit of what the Constitution 2010 really intended to achieve by all of this. But we have to close. Actually, I think that Francis, one of these days, with that Kusetiana and the other one was, I don't know, Vipindi. We will have a news gang, a news gang edition.
And while we do that, let's invite Patrick Igunza. It would be nothing without your design.
He actually lost us on that Vipindre thing.
Yes,
but I know you all looked at him like,
thought, okay, what's that we missed?
I realized it a day later.
Before Igunza, Sina ngufu.
Sina namna. But here's another thing before we close. Listen, some news that we absolutely have to update you on before we close and give you our commentaries. The Kenya men's basketball team, the Morans, have beaten Morocco 96-66 to reach the final of the FIBA African Championships in Mali. I mean, they will now face the winner of the next semi-final between the DRC and Angola.
Listen, Yvonne, Morans beat Lions, who are Moroccans.
Okay. Yeah. And therefore, who are either the DRC and Angola?
That is one of the things. That is one of the sports we are not very popular in. So this is a very big one. It's like Harambee Stars reaching the finals of the Africa Cup of Nations.
It is big. It is big.
Just a quick text on our first discussion, actually the second discussion, which is on the corruption. And why don't you take us through the paper trail? 4.5 billion. Wired from Rome to London and back to Nairobi, to payment for tiles and carpets, towels, blankets, etc. To whose hotels and other developments were these taken? We need to be given a break as citizens. And from whose account in the bank at Westlands were the payments being made? These are some of the things.
I'm sure those are questions that we hope to see answered in the court process.